The auctioneer's voice cracked through the humid air like a warning siren. 15,000 going once. I stood at the edge of the courthouse parking lot, not bidding, just watching strangers decide whether my home was worth the price of a used pickup truck. My hands smelled of copper and wire insulation from an unfinished job, but right now, electricity was the last thing I could fix. They called it a foreclosure sale. I called it theft with a clipboard. Going twice, the crowd shifted, eyes cold, no one caring about the man who'd built that house for his daughter's weekend visits. To them, it was just property, a bargain to flip. To me, it was where 16-year-old Emma learned to grill burgers in the summer, where we argued about curfew and algebra homework, with a front porch light always stayed on for her. How did it come to this? Not because I missed a mortgage payment. Not because I ignored the rules. I did everything by the book, applied for the permits, got every approval stamped and signed. No, I was standing here because one woman decided she could turn neighborhood politics into a personal empire. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, real estate agent, queen of the cul-de-sac. She had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes and a voice trained to say, "I'm just enforcing the rules," while twisting the knife. She didn't care about windows or fences or paint colors. She cared about control and profit. The gavel slammed. Sold. Just like that. A stranger owned the roof over my daughter's head. I should have been crushed. Instead, something electric ran through me. The same current I'd felt tracing a short circuit in a darkened factory at 3 a.m. That spark when you know you've found the problem, and all that's left is to fix it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 months earlier, I thought I'd found a perfect reset button on life. Willowbrook Estates looked like the kind of place where people waved at each other and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. After the divorce, Emma needed stability. I needed a place where the loudest thing at night was the hum of crickets, not lawyers arguing over custody. The house was dated, sure, but I'm an electrician. I don't scare easy at a little work. Those drafty 1970s windows leaked heat like a busted transformer, so I researched replacements that matched the neighborhood style. Submitted every form, every spec sheet, waited out the HOA's 30-day review like a model resident. Day 28, I got my approval letter. Signed, sealed, official. 2 weeks after installation, my phone lit up with a voice message that would change everything. "Mr. Hendricks, this is President Whitmore. Your modifications are unacceptable. You have until Tuesday to comply." I listened twice, thinking I'd misheard. I hadn't. By Tuesday night, I was standing under fluorescent lights in the community center while Karen slid a violation notice across a folding table like a poker player laying down her winning hand. $500. Pay up or face further action. Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned with something darker than rule enforcement. When I pointed to the signed approval letter, she didn't blink. "Approval doesn't guarantee compliance," she said smoothly, as if she'd been waiting to deliver the line. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with an HOA president. I was dealing with a predator, and I'd just been marked as prey. Now, standing in the courthouse parking lot, watching my life sell for pennies, I understood the kind of power Karen Whitmore wielded. Not the power of money. I'd seen plenty of that. Not even political power. I'd sparred with building inspectors tougher than her. This was the power of intimidation. The kind that makes good people keep their heads down and their mouths shut. The kind that drives families out of their homes while neighbors close their curtains. But here's the thing about electricians. We don't back off when a circuit shorts out. We trace it. We find the fault. And we fix it permanently. Karen had just flipped the wrong breaker. And I was about to light up her entire operation. The first fine was just the opening shot. By the end of the month, Karen Whitmore had turned my quiet little house into ground zero for her personal war. A second letter arrived, thicker than the first, every line laced with legal threats. My unauthorized windows now carried a $1,000 balance. The language was cold, clinical. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties up to foreclosure. Foreclosure. Over windows she'd already approved. Emma noticed before I could hide it. 16 years old, sharp as copper wire. "Dad, why are you reading mail at midnight?" she asked, standing barefoot in the hallway, hair tangled from sleep. "Just work stuff?" I lied, sliding the letter under a stack of invoices. But she wasn't buying it. She studied my face like I was an electrical panel about to overload. "You look like you did after the divorce," she said softly. "Like you're waiting for something bad to happen." Her words hit harder than any letter could. I promised myself then, whatever Karen had planned, Emma wouldn't feel it. The next HOA meeting smelled like burnt coffee and cheap authority. Karen sat at the front of the room behind a folding table, her blonde bob framed perfectly by the overhead lights, a leather portfolio positioned like a shield. "Mr. Hendricks, your continued non-compliance threatens neighborhood property values," she announced as if reading a weather report. Her voice was calm, but her eyes tracked me like I was a bug she meant to pin to cardboard. "I have signed approval," I said, holding up the letter for everyone to see. "This is harassment." The room went still. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. One man coughed. A woman with perfect nails scribbled in her planner, pretending not to listen. Karen's pen scratched across another form. 500 becomes 1,000. 1,000 becomes 2. "That's how this works," she said evenly, like she'd recited this speech before. And maybe she had. That night, I turned my spare bedroom into something between a war room and an electrician's troubleshooting station. Documents lined the walls, violation letters, approval forms, HOA bylaws printed and highlighted. I mapped out every decision Karen's board had made in the last 3 years. By midnight, a pattern emerged. Dozens of homes had the exact same vinyl windows I'd installed. None of them had been fined. The only people targeted were renters, elderly couples, or working-class families like mine. Meanwhile, Karen's country club friends somehow received courtesy reminders instead of violations. It wasn't about windows. It was about control, and something told me it was also about money. I wasn't the only one feeling the squeeze. My neighbor Janet Bennett, 73 years old with a garden that could win awards, called me in a trembling voice. "Oh, Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. Karen stopped by asking if you're financially stable, if you keep your house tidy, if Emma comes around much." "Why would she ask you that?" I said, heat rising in my chest. "Because she did the same thing to me last year. Said my gnomes violated aesthetic standards. I moved them instead of fighting." "But Marcus," Janet paused, her voice cracking like thin glass. "She's building a case against you." That was the night I stopped thinking this was a personal vendetta. This was a system one Karen had engineered, neighbor by neighbor, letter by letter. 3 days later, a certified envelope arrived like a venomous snake in my mailbox. Property lien notice. The fine had somehow mutated into $2,000. Failure to pay would trigger foreclosure proceedings. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter while Emma worked on homework nearby, humming to herself. My hand shook so badly I spilled coffee on the wood grain. Pay Karen's ransom, or pay a lawyer $5,000 up front just to open my case. Either way, I'd bleed money. But electricians don't panic when circuits spark. We traced them to the source, and I was starting to see where Karen's wires ran. The first break came at the county recorder's office. In a basement that smelled like mold and forgotten paper, I found Karen's fatal mistake. Her lien filing skipped key legal steps, missing notices, no 30-day cure period. It was sloppy. She'd assumed a blue-collar electrician wouldn't know the law. Wrong assumption. I photocopied everything, filed a formal challenge, and walked out of that building with my first taste of victory buzzing through me like clean voltage. But when I showed up to the next HOA meeting, Karen didn't look worried. She looked furious. "The board has determined that previous approvals were issued in error," she announced, voice cutting through the air. "All non-compliant windows must be replaced within 60 days. I stood, work boots loud on the linoleum. "You can't retroactively rewrite history, Karen. That's breach of contract." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that." The room fell silent as I met her stare. For the first time, I realized what I was really up against. Not just one power-hungry neighbor. I was up against an entire system built to crush people like me. And I was done being quiet. The call started first. Block numbers, heavy breathing, hang-ups. The kind of harassment too petty to prove, but too deliberate to ignore. Then came the inspector. Anonymous complaint, he said, standing in my driveway with a clipboard, looking embarrassed. Someone says you're doing unlicensed electrical work out of your garage. I handed him my license, insurance, and a list of recent jobs. He nodded, almost apologetic. Marcus, you're cleaner than most contractors I inspect. Whoever's filing these, it's personal. No kidding. By the time Emma noticed the tension, I'd stopped sleeping. I was living off black coffee and adrenaline, cross-referencing HOA meeting minutes with property records late into the night. That's when Janet Bennett called again. Her voice was barely a whisper. Marcus, I found something. You need to come over quietly. Janet's kitchen smelled like jasmine tea and dusted wood polish. She pushed a manila folder across the table with shaking hands. I kept everything from last year. Emails, letters, notes. I didn't have the courage to fight her. Maybe you do. Inside the folder, Karen Whitmore's perfect real estate smile cracked wide open. Email chains between her and board members, typed in the kind of language only people certain they'll never be caught use. We need to be strategic about enforcement. Target renters and blue-collar types first. They're less likely to fight back. I read it twice. My chest felt hot, like someone had jammed a live wire straight into my ribcage. This is discrimination, I said, voice low. Janet nodded. And it's not just you. She's been driving people out for years. The Patels, the Thompsons, the Martinezes, all pressured to sell cheap. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was running a business. Devalue houses through harassment, then buy them through her LLC at a discount. And I was her next target. I called Ohio Legal Aid the next morning. The intake attorney listened patiently, then interrupted me mid-sentence. Sir, if you have proof of selective enforcement, this isn't just an HOA dispute. This is a federal fair housing violation. How much documentation do you have? 3 boxes, I said. Photos, timelines, letters, emails. 5 years worth. A pause, then a voice sharpened by sudden interest. Hold everything. We're assigning counsel immediately. 2 days later, Sarah Martinez walked into my life. 30-something, sharp suit, sharper mind. She spread my photos across a conference table like a detective laying out a crime scene. Marcus, she said, tapping one photo after another. This is systematic. You've documented what most people can't. A full-blown pattern. Karen didn't just break HOA rules. She broke federal law. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope lasted exactly 3 days. Emma came home from school pale as drywall. Dad, someone called a guidance counselor. Said I might be neglected because of your legal trouble. My hands clenched so hard, I nearly snapped the pencil I was holding. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. They were coming after my kid. That night, I sat in my evidence room, staring at the timelines taped to the wall. Names, dates, addresses, victims of Karen's quiet reign. But one detail stopped me cold. Kavi Holdings LLC. 3 properties, all purchased within months of major HOA violations. 2 of them I recognized immediately. Families I'd watch pack up moving vans in the dead of night. The 3rd address made my stomach drop. Same vinyl windows as mine. Same contractor. Same month of installation. And Karen had signed the violation notices herself before buying the house dirt cheap. The hypocrisy burned hotter than any wire I'd ever stripped. She was fining me for windows she profited from. I stayed up until dawn, digging through tax records and property transfers. What I found was worse than I imagined. She wasn't just discriminating, she was running a racket, using HOA authority to crush homeowners, then flipping their houses for profit. When I showed Sarah the next morning, she didn't even try to hide her grin. Marcus, you just turned this from a civil dispute into a federal RICO case. That afternoon, I walked into the community center for another HOA meeting, clutching the folder like a live grenade. Karen sat at the head table, perfectly composed, pen poised like a dagger. When she tried to hit me with another violation escalation, I stood tall and let my voice carry. Your lien is invalid, Karen. And I have proof you've been targeting working-class families while protecting your friends. Proof you own properties you stole through fake violations. Proof you broken federal law. The room froze. Her face went white, then red, then something darker. For the first time, Karen Whitmore looked afraid. But fear makes dangerous people reckless. And I was about to find out just how far she'd go to protect her empire. The retaliation came like clockwork. First, the late-night phone calls. No words, just static, as if someone wanted me to hear the silence itself. Then a series of anonymous complaints. Trash cans visible from the street, work truck parked in my own driveway, unsafe wiring, in a house wired better than most hospitals. Every day felt like a chess match against an opponent who didn't care about rules. One Tuesday morning, Officer Janet Rodriguez knocked on my door, her expression tight. "Marcus, I hate to do this, but Karen Whitmore filed a restraining order petition. Claims you're stalking her." I almost laughed. "The woman who hired someone to photograph my daughter?" "Save it for the judge," Janet said gently. "But between us, her story has more holes than Swiss cheese." Court was supposed to feel like justice. Instead, it felt like another ambush. Karen walked and dressed like she'd spent the night rehearsing Frightened Victim in front of a mirror. Minimal makeup, trembling hands, soft cardigan instead of her usual real estate armor. "Your Honor," her lawyer began, "my client fears for her safety. Mr. Hendricks has been following her, photographing her home, making threatening calls." Sarah Martinez rose calmly, voice cutting like a blade. "Your Honor, we have security footage, phone records, and GPS data proving Mr. Hendricks was at work or at home during every alleged incident. This petition is fabricated." Judge Patterson barely needed 15 minutes. Petition denied. Ms. Whitmore, filing false reports is a crime. Karen's face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. As we left the courtroom, she didn't look beaten. She looked cornered. That evening, Emma called me at work, voice trembling. "Dad, someone broke into the house. Your office, it's trashed." I broke every speed limit getting home. The evidence room looked like a storm had ripped through it. Photos torn off the walls, boxes overturned, computer smashed. Whoever had done this wasn't looking for jewelry or cash. They wanted the proof. But I prepared for this. Duplicate files sat safe in Sarah's office. Backup drives hidden in my closet. Officer Rodriguez surveyed the wreckage, flashlight beam sliding across the shredded paper. "Marcus, this wasn't random. Someone wanted to destroy evidence in a federal case. That's obstruction of justice, a felony." I nodded, jaw tight. "We both know who." Rodriguez didn't answer, but her silence said everything. The harassment escalated into something uglier. Emma came home from school in tears. A brick had been thrown through our window, a note tied to it. "Drop the case or lose more than windows." I called Sarah. Then I called the FBI. By nightfall, federal agents were fingerprinting the brick while neighbors gathered outside, shaking their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Patterson brought Emma hot chocolate. Carlos Martinez stood guard by the front door with crossed arms. Janet Bennett showed up wielding a rolling pin like a 73-year-old bodyguard. The community Karen had spent years dividing was starting to unite, but that only made her more dangerous. Meanwhile, Sarah's investigation had exploded. "Marcus," she said during a late-night call, "we're not talking about one corrupt HOA president anymore. We've traced at least 5 properties Karen's LLC bought after pressuring owners with bogus fines. It's racketeering, wire fraud, housing discrimination, the works. The U.S. Attorney's Office is building a case." "Good," I said, "because she's not slowing down." "She will," Sarah promised. "But you need to hold on. They'll try to break you before this hits court." She was right. By Friday, someone reported my electrical business to the state board. An inspector spent an hour combing through my licenses and insurance paperwork. "Marcus, you're solid," he said finally. "This complaint's garbage. I'll note it as malicious intent." Later that night, a tow truck showed up in my driveway, Karen demanding my work truck be hauled off as a commercial vehicle violation. The driver called me first. "Sir, we're not towing your truck. You're parked legal, but this woman's real agitated. Should we call police?" "Yes," I said, staring out the window as Karen argued with the officer who arrived minutes later. Watching her squirm while Rodriguez wrote a harassment citation almost felt satisfying. Almost. Until I remembered the brick. This wasn't a game anymore. In quieter moments, doubt crept in. I'd sit at the kitchen table after Emma went to bed, staring at her half-finished college essay. What does justice mean to you? She'd written at the top of the page. I wanted to tell her justice was real, that the system worked if you fought hard enough. But the weight in my chest told me the truth. If Karen could throw a brick through my window, what else could she do? I could pay the fines, sell the house, walk away. Keep Emma safe. But every time I thought about it, I pictured Janet's trembling hands, the Patel family forced out of their home, Carlos drowning in violations for no reason but being a renter. This wasn't just about me anymore. If I backed down, Karen would win, and someone else would be next. The pressure was boiling, and I knew, deep down, it was about to explode. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and nerves. I carried 3 boxes of evidence, each one heavier than the last. Not with paper, but with years of neighbors' fear, fines, and ruined lives. Karen Whitmore was already there, perched beside her 4th attorney in as many months. Gone was the confident HOA president with the helmet bob haircut and iron smile. In her place sat someone pale and tight-lipped, glancing at every shadow like it might indict her. Sarah Martinez leaned over. Stay calm. You've already won. She just doesn't know it yet. The hearing was supposed to be about foreclosure. Instead, Sarah turned it into a demolition. Your Honor, she began, spreading photographs across the table like a magician revealing every card. We're filing a federal fair housing counterclaim. What you see here is not enforcement of community standards. It is selective targeting, economic profiling, and systematic fraud. Judge Morrison, sharp-eyed and unsentimental, leaned forward. Go on. Sarah tapped the first box. 47 homes with identical window replacements. 0 violations for HOA friends. 100% enforcement against working-class and minority residents. We have internal HOA emails strategizing about which families were least likely to fight back. She lifted Janet Bennett's manila folder like it was holy scripture. Direct quotes from Ms. Whitmore. Target renters and blue-collar types first. They're easier to break. The courtroom went still. Even the court reporter paused her typing for a fraction of a second. Karen's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, these allegations are documented, Sarah cut in, and they're only the beginning. KW Holdings LLC, Ms. Whitmore's shell company, purchased 5 properties within months of those families receiving escalating fines. Each sale far below market value. That's racketeering, wire fraud, and housing discrimination rolled into one. She slid forward a printout. Here's the smoking gun. One of those houses has the same windows Ms. Whitmore fined my client for. She not only ignored her own rules, she profited for breaking them. Karen tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, do you deny owning these properties? Karen's lips trembled. I don't manage. Answer the question. Her attorney whispered frantically, but it was too late. Her hesitation spoke louder than any admission. Judge Morrison's voice turned cold. This foreclosure case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for investigation. I expected Karen to sag in defeat. Instead, her face hardened, the look of someone who just realized losing in court was the least of her problems. By the time I left the courthouse, the FBI was already involved. They loved patterns, and Karen had gift-wrapped them a 5-year timeline of corruption. Conspiracy, mail fraud, white froth, obstruction of justice, even intimidation of a federal witness, courtesy of the brick she'd thrown through my window. The next 72 hours were chaos. Anonymous calls escalated to explicit threats. A private investigator parked outside my house, snapping photos of Emma on her way to school. Dad, why won't they stop? She whispered one night, sitting on the edge of my bed. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Because they're afraid of what happens if we don't. At 6:12 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning, 2 unmarked SUVs rolled into Willowbrook Estates. I stood in my driveway, clutching a mug of coffee, as FBI agents swarmed Karen's Tudor-style home. Neighbors peeked through curtains as they led her out in handcuffs, still wearing her silk robe and that old real estate smile, now trembling. The flash of cameras cut through the dawn like lightning. "Marcus," Agent Sarah Kim said as she passed me on the sidewalk. "She's facing racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction. 40 years if the judge throws the book at her." For the first time in months, my shoulders loosened. The breaker had flipped. The circuit of fear Karen had wired through our neighborhood went dead. That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. The community center was packed. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now stood shoulder to shoulder. Sarah Martinez walked to the microphone with calm authority, holding a settlement check that glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Marcus Hendricks will receive $75,000 in damages," she said. "But more importantly, Karen Whitmore is permanently barred from HOA leadership in Ohio. Her LLC will be dissolved, and every illegally acquired home sold back at fair market value." The room erupted in applause. Emma's clapping hands blurred through my tears. Janet Bennett leaned over, whispering, "We're free, Marcus. You did it." I shook my head. We did it. But even in that moment of victory, I knew this wasn't just about one neighborhood or one corrupt woman in a silk robe. This was proof that ordinary people could burn out corruption if they stayed wired together. 6 months later, the house felt different. Not because of the settlement money, though I'd used some of it to repair the brick-damaged window, but because the air in Willowbrook Estates no longer hummed with fear. On Saturday mornings, I heard kids riding bikes past my driveway, not rushing home to avoid Karen's clipboard patrol. Janet Bennett's garden gnomes stood proudly at attention again, little ceramic sentries guarding against tyranny. Carlos Martinez grilled on his front porch, music spilling into the street like it was welcome again. Emma noticed it first. "Dad," she said, sipping lemonade on the back steps, "people wave now." "They always waved," I said. "Not like this." She was right. The waves were different. No longer polite masks, but real. The settlement money was more than a check. It was a catalyst. $25,000 went straight into a scholarship fund for local students. Emma helped organize the first award ceremony, handing out envelopes to kids she used to see hiding indoors when Karen drove by. Another $15,000 repaired the neighborhood playground. The ribbon cutting drew 300 people, laughing parents, squealing toddlers, even a county commissioner who'd avoided HOA drama for years. When the first child flew off the new swing set, I swear the cheers shook the rust off every mailbox in Willowbrook. The rest of the money went to something quieter but just as powerful, a legal defense fund. The next time an HOA bully tried to muscle someone out of their home, they wouldn't be standing alone. As for Karen Whitmore, her story turned from neighborhood gossip into evening news fodder. She pled down to racketeering and obstruction to avoid trial. 3 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, real estate license gone forever. Her LLC dissolved. Every home she'd stolen returned to market value. But the real sentence wasn't prison. It was irrelevance. The woman who once made grown men cross the street now couldn't even get her calls returned. I ran into her husband once at the hardware store, pale and tired. He didn't offer excuses, just lowered his eyes and kept walking. Emma decided to write her college application essay about the whole fight. "My father taught me that documentation beats intimidation, community beats corruption, and that even ordinary people can rewire a broken system," she read aloud at the kitchen table. I pretended not to tear up. "Pre-law program, huh?" I said. She smirked. "Somebody has to keep people like Karen in check." The neighborhood didn't just heal, it transformed. Carlos Martinez was elected HOA president by a landslide. His first act was simple but profound: monthly public financial reports and a bylaw banning any board member from profiting off HOA enforcement. His second act was more symbolic. He commissioned a bronze plaque for the community center, TO, those who stood together against fear. Janet Bennett unveiled it herself, voice steady as she said, "We're no longer afraid of who knocks on our doors." The applause was louder than anything that old Linoleum Hall had ever heard. One evening, I stood in my evidence room, now stripped of red string and legal folders. It looked strangely bare, like a stage after the actors have gone home. I thought about boxing it all up for good, but instead I left one wall intact. The timeline of every violation, every letter, every victory. Not as a monument to Karen's cruelty, but as a reminder of what happens when good people stop being quiet. Emma wandered in, looked around, and said, "You're going to turn this into a museum, aren't you?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe just a story we keep telling." The first Willowbrook Freedom Festival drew food trucks, live music, and neighbors who hadn't shared a sidewalk in years. Kids chalked the pavement with words like justice and community, while Sarah Martinez manned a booth handing out legal resources for other HOA victims. When the sun dipped below the rooftops, Emma tugged my sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "look." Across the street, the house that once belonged to the Patel family glowed with new life. A young couple sat on the porch swing, holding their baby, laughing without fear. They waved to us. This time I waved back first. Later that night, I sat alone under the same windows that had started everything. Their glass reflected the warm lights of a neighborhood no longer under siege. People think power comes from titles, from money, from signatures on official paper. Karen believed that. But real power, the kind you can't bully or buy, comes from neighbors who choose to stand side by side. I traced the edge of Emma's scholarship envelope, still sitting on the kitchen table, and smiled. What we built wasn't just safer homes. It was a community wired together, so tight no one could cut it apart again. As I switched off the porch light, I thought about something my old instructor used to say: a circuit only works when every connection holds steady. Turns out, neighborhoods are the same way. And when the breaker flips on corruption, you don't just get justice, you get light.